Welcome to Real Conversations with Real Moms. And today I am extremely happy to have Gina LaPapa here from beingbrave.faith. And we're going to talk about fear in motherhood and releasing fear and trusting God in motherhood. So welcome, Gina. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a bit about yourself and your motherhood and just your journey, especially tell us about your family, but also how cancer and your early motherhood brought you to Jesus.
Sure. Well, I am a mom of 5. I have our kids range in ages from 23 down to 7. And my oldest is my stepson. And then we have 3 biological children. And then our youngest, we adopted when he was 2.5. So our family is made up of all kinds. And so, my early motherhood journey, coincided with a little bit with my cancer diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And so my two of our middle ones were 2 and 1 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Mm-hmm. So they were little. My stepson was a little bit older than that. But, my faith journey was just that, a journey. I grew up in a faith that I was comfortable with up until I probably hit high school. Then I started questioning a lot. And I was, kind of on that search throughout high school, throughout college. And even after our marriage, my husband and I were still both jointly, thankfully, looking for something more in our faith. And so once we had our biological children, we were, questioning, like, how are we going to raise them? What kind of what faith are we going to raise them in, and what principles and values and morals are we going to try and instill in them? And so I think for me, I was on that search for a really long time. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed with breast cancer that was kind of the 2x4 that hit me over the head to say, Gina, it's not about how much you can research, how many people you can interview, nothing like that. It was a matter of simply faith. Mm-hmm. And it was really the Lord kind of telling me that there's nothing that you can tangibly grasp in order to reach that. You have to have that faith yourself, and you have to have that belief, and to have that personal relationship with the Lord. And so it wasn't until I was diagnosed, it was literally on the ride home from the doctor's office, that I prayed. And I realized later that that's really what I did, is I gave my life over to Christ to say, Lord, I can't do this without you. And it was the first time I felt out of control, truly. Obviously we know there's many things in life we cannot control. But I always felt like I could, twist it in my favor. And I don't know why I thought that. I was young. I didn't know. And so having that revelation was really the jumping point for me to really then say, okay, what does this relationship with God look like? And now how am I going to infuse that with raising my children?
I love how your story is really about God reaching you and you responding to God. It was a very personal thing. It wasn't something that was put upon you. It was something that God reached into your life at a moment when you really were receptive and you responded to that. And then later there was the external support for that, but how it was a personal experience, that really blesses me to hear your story about that. So let me think. So the next, you came to Jesus as an adult. And when we talked earlier, you had told me that part of the things that were struggling for you in the early years of motherhood were, I feel behind the 8 ball. Mm-hmm. Because I just came to faith, and now I'm trying to raise these people and help them come to their faith. And it feels like you're trying to catch it and give it away at the same time. And I think a lot of us feel that way as early moms, whether we've been raised in a Christian home or not. We can feel we're behind the 8 ball in so many ways. We want to catch up with whatever we're supposed to know as moms. So I just love to hear more about that stage of your motherhood.
Yeah. So when I first became a Christian, I don't know if this is what it's like for others, but for me, I felt like I couldn't read enough. I couldn't hear enough. I couldn't talk enough about it to just kind of be that sponge and absorb all that I could, to just learn. And so for me, it was, constantly having worship music on, and then listening to messages and going to church, and then digging in and really understanding what the meaning of that was. Like, I just wanted to learn it all. And so it was, kind of like you said, I felt like I was behind the eight ball, because I was thinking, gosh, how am I going to teach this to my kids if I don't even know it myself? And so I felt like I had to know it all first before I could teach it to them. And I quickly realized that, and this kind of transitioned into our decision to homeschool. That's a separate topic, but I realized even within that, as a teacher, you just need to be one step ahead. And so it was really I don't need to know it all. I don't have to know it all in order to teach this, and then I realized, hey, we can grow together. So it was kind of sweet looking back on it, because I could look at, Bibles, and, even though I had my own Bible for a really long time, I, still didn't quite understand all of it, but it was in reading the kids' version that I was like, oh, I get this. And so then I was able to apply that not only for them, but then for my own learning. And so it's a little humbling to say that, it was the kids' materials that actually excited me and got me really into learning about my faith, because it was very simplistic. It was very easy to understand. It was very easy to absorb. But then I could also, as an adult, take that to a very, as deep as I wanted it to be. So, for them, yes, I felt like I was struggling to teach them, but I did learn early on too, that I didn't have to know it all. I just had to live out what I was learning, and then they would model that.
I think that hunger that God gave you in that early part of your motherhood is just a gift. It's just a gift, because not all of us have that hunger at all times, and to have that at the same time that you're feeding your children is it's a gift to all of you, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I can certainly say now that I've been a Christian for a long time, when I'm teaching my 7-year-old, I have to be diligent and know that my effort needs to be more, because I already know these things, yet I still need to teach them to him. Mm-hmm. So it's that difference of, I have to be more intentional. So I don't think that if I had, when I became a Christian, when the 3 middle ones were all little, it was such an easy transition for me to pour that out. Whereas now I have to be more intentional with a 7-year-old to say, yes, he doesn't know these things, and we still are responsible for teaching him these things. So it's has challenged me as time has gone on to really do that. So I do understand, maybe women who have been Christians their entire lives, and then, having kids, it's like, how do you do this? Like, I can understand that same struggle in a way. Like at the beginning of motherhood, I was struggling because I was like, I don't know. And now I'm struggling because I'm thinking, gosh, I know, but what do I actually teach him? Like, right. So it's, I can see the struggle on both ends.
I think that homeschooling for us has been a lot like that too, with a 7-year gap between our kids. With my oldest one, everything was so intense and I wanted to do it just right. And I was learning a lot along with him because I had not been homeschooled. And so even my history sense was like off as far as the timeline, but to go through it with him and relearn it, and then to take it with my younger one, it's like, I've done this so many times. You just feel like you have to refresh your own passion for it in a lot of ways, and then refresh what's critical, and each child is a little different too. But anyway, so during the early years, you had some fears in your motherhood. You talked about those with me when we talked privately. And I'd love for you to share what some of those fears were and how they drove you in your interaction with your children.
Yeah, I think this is a common fear for us moms, is that, we're given these kids as a gift, and the Lord has gifted us with these children. And so, our main job is to raise them to love the Lord. And, He's commissioned us to do that one thing. And in the early years, I felt like there was such that weight of responsibility that if I don't do it just right, I'm going to mess them up. And they're not going to love Jesus. And they're going to be that prodigal son. And they're not even going to come back. Mm-hmm. And so, there was such fear in that to say, if I don't do this perfectly, then they're gone. Then that's it. And I did learn as time went on that I don't have that kind of power.
Praise God.
Right? That, it is our job, I think, to do the best we can to point them to Jesus and to raise them to love God, and to fill your homes with everything that points to Him, and to be that role model and to be their mentors. But I also feel like, that's where free will comes in, and they're their own person. And as they grow, they're going to make their own choices and make their own decisions. And you just have to trust that God can fill in all those gaps, because we're only human and we can only do so much. Not saying that we can just take our hands off the wheel and say, okay, Jesus, you got it all. Like, we do have responsibility in this, but to know that it's not all up to me is comforting. And to know that, I can only do what I can, and then God will fill in the rest. He's capable of filling that in.
He has a plan to fill it in, right? And that's the goodness, knowing that, He did that for me. He did that for you. Mm-hmm. And that He'll do that for our children, that we pour in, like you say, the good, and we poured in bad. I mean, we all make mistakes. And I think when we start to feel like we have the ownership of their faith journey and that it's up to us, then when they succeed, we take credit that's not ours. And when they fail, we take guilt on that's not ours. So we should be appropriately remorseful for things that we did that were messed up, that fouled them up, but we go back and repent of those and grow. By grace, we grow. And then the things that we do that are awesome, we thank God for the ability to do those and just leave all the results in His hands. He so cares for our children. And I think we lose sight of the fact of His immense care for them sometimes, especially when we're living in fear, like you're talking about, which I think so many moms, it's just a heartbeat of mine. I think so many moms we get bogged down with fear. And then when we parent from fear, we're not freed up to really be the best mom that we can be. So okay, so what were some of the events or experiences that taught you to let go and trust God? I just really want to hear from you about this.
Yes. I think one of the biggest ones for me is, the act of apologizing to my kids is a big thing. And that is something that I did not grow up experiencing a lot. And so to trust Him that when I show my vulnerabilities and I show my weaknesses to my kids, when I do mess up and I do make those mistakes, that's a good thing, that they can learn from that, and that they know that I'm not, full of pride. When I make a mistake, I say I'm sorry and I ask for forgiveness and I repent. And I didn't realize how far that really goes until I started practicing that with my kids. And those little ones, they'll catch you. I mean, they echo those words right back at you. And, I was teaching them, hey, that's not nice. Say you're sorry. And, there came a point in time where it was one of my kids, I think they were around 2 or 3, maybe younger than 3. It had to have been about 2, where I did something and I got that stern look and they were like, Mommy, you don't do that. You say sorry. And I was like, oh, yeah, Mom needs to say sorry too. And so I think for me, that was a good admonishment for me to say that it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay for my kids to see me make mistakes, especially in my parenting them, so that there's not this high bar that they feel like they need to hold up to for themselves as kids, and then for themselves when they become parents too, that they realize, none of us are perfect and none of us are, have it all together all the time. And so I learned that, I need to apologize to them and then trust that, they're not going to look at all those mistakes as, pointing their fingers back at me, but also forgive and grace as well.
Yeah, I remember talking to my son about a time when I had gotten really irritated with him. And he was like, after we were talking at bedtime, and he said, I was just really bad, Mom. And I felt so terrible hearing him reflect that back to me. And I said, you weren't bad. You did something that you shouldn't have done. But my reaction was out of line. And so I was the one who was in error more than you even. And I think taking that weight off of them so they don't end up growing up with shame, that they're somehow responsible for their parents' behavior, and that if they could only be better than their parents, they have the same beliefs that we were talking about we had for our kids. They can take that on, that it's their responsibility that we act a certain way until we own it. When we own it, then they're relieved of that burden, and they can just be freed back up to grow and know that we all make mistakes. And I think one of the things I've been really thinking about in healthy families, it's not that conflict is less or that people make fewer mistakes. It's that, although that can be, we grow to a place of a healthier place, but still it's how do we bounce out of those conflicts? How do we restore more quickly? How do we tie our heartstrings back together? How do we become humble and honest with one another? That's what a healthy family is. So it's not so much the condition that changes, but how we respond to it, and immunity, and so I just think that's beautiful what you shared, Gina. So as you and I talked in the past, you mentioned how God makes things beautiful from our mistakes. And I love that. And you related this both to our mistakes as parents and the mistakes that our children make. And I would like for you to talk about how you've seen beauty come out of mistakes in your life or in your home and parenting.
So one of the things I'm going to back up a little bit is we had talked earlier about my stepson.
Yes.
And, there was a lot of fear in that parenting role. And so there were times where I would step in, and, my husband had him at a very young age, and we started dating when my stepson was only 9 months old. And so I had grown up with the babysitting experience and the nannying experience, and, just knowing how to physically care for children. And my husband did not. He was all thumbs. I mean, he was on a crash course to learning for sure. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of allowed me to step into that role when my stepson was with us. And so I became a second mom to him, and so when he was in our care, my husband kind of let me take the lead in a lot of ways for his physical care. And so as he got older, I realized that it's not always my place to, yes, I am a parent figure to him, but there are many things that I shouldn't do, and maybe would be better if I didn't do. Mm-hmm. And so I had to kind of take a step back after a number of years. I think it was when my stepson was around 8 or 9 that I, kind of said to my husband, listen, I think that my involvement in some of these situations is actually not healthy and not good for him or for the rest of our family. And so I kind of took that step back and, said, you need to, take the lead on some of these things instead of me taking the lead. And we stumbled quite a bit, but it ended up being better for everybody. There was less tension in the home. There was less tension, within our marriage. And so I feel like my initial, again, talking about that fear of like messing up, that fear of, well, if I don't step in, this is what's going to happen. If I don't step in and say, you can't watch that show, or if I don't step in and say, oh, you're not eating healthy, then if he gets sick, then I'm going to have to take care of him and it's all on me. And, like having that burden on me, I look back on it now and it seems so silly that, to think that I could control all of that and that it was my responsibility. And so, I would say, some of my mistakes early on in the step parenting role was taking on too much in certain areas. I mean, I don't regret being involved in his life the way I was, I think that we have a beautiful relationship now because of that. With me always being there for him and always being available for him. But there was definitely, some apologizing that had to be done to say, hey, you know what? You have parents here that are making these decisions for you, and you don't need the stress of another. And so that was something that I learned, and that God was able to cover that as well, to say, don't think you have this much power in this, because you don't.
I think even in a family where there's not stepchildren or another, outside, two families raising one child, we can still, as moms, take on that mantle, that burden, and I was thinking as you're speaking about how Jesus says his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And yet we take on these extra things and just pour them onto our own shoulders as moms, that everything, their nutrition, their screen time, their education, their character development, we just take it all on. We just put it all on our own shoulders. And I know that even just within this past week, I've been praying over things that I needed to sort of almost physically hand over to my husband. And because it's not that he's not invested, it's just a lot of times, especially if a man works outside the house and he comes home, he doesn't know what the whole ins and outs of what's been going on. And then you're taking care of it all and you're just doing it, and you're not thinking like, wow, I really need to actually hand this over to him and tell him, look, I need you to do this. And he's not going to do it the way you say. He's going to do it his way. And it's not going to necessarily be a straight line from where you hand it over to where you would love to see it be. And so it's that letting go of the process of it growing, and that's hard when we have an investment in how it goes, but it's so necessary to empower our husbands that way, and to have a balance in the way the relationships flow in the house. I think that's so important, so that no one figure is the central person doing everything, because that can build resentment, and also it's just not a balanced way. So I think that's just a beautiful example. And even not having had stepkids in our home, I've had to do the same, like realizing, wait, I'm carrying all this, and then I'm upset that I'm carrying it all, but it's like, I'm the one who put it there. Nobody else put it on me, So like if you run around picking up all the stuff around the house, and then you're like, nobody's picking up around here. Well, why would they? You're the one doing it, and it's the same thing emotionally and spiritually, or just responsibility wise. So just an excellent example, Gina. I'm glad you shared that. So you shared a very sweet story with me about a difficult time your son went through, and how you were able to be coming alongside him during that. And for me, your example in that was just such a good model. And I would love to ask you, especially since your focus is on bravery and courage and fearlessness, just how courage played a role in that story. So if you could share that story and just share how bravery and trust in God helped you through that.
Sure. So this was about a year and a half ago. My son lost a friend and teammate in a car accident. And it was, whenever there's a loss, it's heartbreaking, and there's going to be grief, and there's going to be, the processing that goes along with that. And, we were at his golf tournament, and his teammate drove home with another boy, and on their way home, they got into a car accident. And so his friend ended up passing away, but we didn't know. There was a time in between the car accident and the news. My son, was waiting. We heard that this happened, but we don't know what's happening. We don't know if he's okay. We don't know, his first thought was, Mom, I want to go to the hospital. They said he was here. I want to go there. And I said, honey, no, let's just wait. Let's wait to hear, how he's doing. His family needs to be with him, and they don't need a bunch of boys at the hospital to manage, let's just take a step back. And, when he actually did get the news, I was with him. We were actually at the school. They were having a college fair that night. So I said, let's just keep going. Let's go with our plans. And he gets the phone call, and I saw him from a distance, and I just went to him and sat down next to him. We were outside the school, just sitting on the steps, and I put my arm around him. And it was just a moment of where I knew what he was going through.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I had, unfortunately, a lot of friends passing away in my younger years and in my teen years. And it seemed like every few months there was another funeral to go to at our high school. And so for me, that was part of my growing up. Death was always a part of life. And so I don't know whether I look back on that as sort of a blessing, because I realized how to grieve and how to really, then once I became a Christian, process that in, you know, through a biblical perspective. And so when I was sitting on those steps with my son, you could tell like this was the first experience that he had that was just so gut wrenching. And so I sat with him and put my arm around him, and he was like, "Mom, you don't know." And I just sat there and I said, "Son, I do." I said, and I was describing like the physiological symptoms that your body can present. And I said, your head's spinning, you feel lightheaded, you feel like you're going to throw up, you feel sick, you feel like you don't know what to do. And I'm just going through that list. And he just looks at me and he's like, "How do you know?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, I've been in your shoes." I said, and I know, I don't know what your pain is right now, but I do remember what my pain was like. And if it's anything like what my pain was, let me help you. And so over the next, you know, few hours, few weeks, few months, like I was able to walk alongside him with that. And he recognized that I did empathize with him and that I wanted to sit in it with him instead of trying to just make it better. And I think that made a huge difference in his processing of it all. And so, you know, just having the strength as a mom to know that your kids are hurting and they're going through something really, really hard, and there's no way you can make it better. There's just no way. And I think just be there with them in that is crucial, and not to try and fix it, and just be there with them shoulder to shoulder. You know, it's hard as mom. You want to fix it all. You want to make things better, and you want to, you know, just get back to life. And that's not always the best thing. And so it took me a lot to put aside my mom feelings. But then also, because I experienced something similar, I can really say, okay, this is just me as a human. This is just me, you know, as somebody who's sitting next to you that understands. And so it was a tough balance to balance that without projecting my stuff on him, but at the same time wanting to support him. And so that was a lot to go through. And I think it was just a testament then later when he came to me at one point and he said, "Mom, just thanks for sitting with me. Just thanks for being there and not trying to fix it." And he said, "You know, I know that you understand." And like for him, that was enough. And so it was comforting to know that, yeah, we're not going to do things right. We're going to mess up and whatever, but to have the courage to walk with him in that without trying to input too much was definitely a balancing act, and something that I learned.
I think I just hear the trust behind that and underneath it, Gina, that because you know you're not the ultimate one that's in charge or going to heal or repair, that you were able to just be present with him in that. And that to me speaks volumes. And it's something that isn't just for crisis. It's especially important during crisis, especially important when we have teenagers. You know, they're branching out and becoming themselves, and they don't need or want as much of our input as they want our presence and support. They want a safe place to land, even though they don't necessarily act like it externally all the time. They need more than ever a place that just feels like a sanctuary. because
Mhm.
the world is not a sanctuary for them at that stage of life usually. And so, but even as I think of my younger children, those when my kids were younger, and my 10-year-old right now, just thinking like, what he needs most of all is for my presence, not my fixing. And that when we can trust God with our children, then we can be present with them in
Mhm.
that way that you described. And I just think it's such a beautiful, it's a true story. It's an actual thing you lived out, but it's such a great model for us as a story that we can hold in our hearts and use as a reminder to be present with our kids, not always be quick to fix. They're not a
Mhm.
broken problem to be fixed. They're a person to be loved. So I really appreciate your words in that story. If there's a mom right now that's listening to our interview that's been struggling with fear in her motherhood, and you could say anything to encourage her heart, what would you say?
Well, first, I would say that you're doing great. I mean, we as moms, and I'll speak for myself, but I find that this is prevalent with a lot of us, is that, we second guess ourselves, and we're wondering, are we doing a good enough job? Are we, am I going to mess up my kids? Let me tell you, you will.
Right.
Just a
Yeah.
matter. I mean, that's not to be a discouragement. It's actually an encouragement, because you're not perfect, and God is big enough and good enough and great enough that He will pick up all those pieces, and He'll, you, like I said before, you don't have that kind of power, and so it's, yeah, you're doing great. You're doing great, and just keep praying. I think prayer is one of the most powerful things that we can do for our kids and for ourselves, is to pray, instead of be a prayer warrior instead of a prayer worrier.
Mm.
And so I think that would be something that I would say to encourage moms, especially the ones that are just starting out. If I had an older, my older self now telling my younger self, it's going to be okay. Like, yes, things will happen, but it's going to be okay. Like, you're doing great. Just keep going.
Even when it's not okay, it's going to be okay. That's it,
Yep.
I think. Yeah. Thank you so very much for your time today, Gina. It's been such a huge privilege and blessing to have you here talking. And
Well,
I'm
thank you.
grateful. So can you share where people can find you on Facebook and the web and all that good stuff?
Sure. I am at beingbrave.faith. So www.beingbrave.faith is the website. I'm on Facebook. You can find me. Gina LaPapa Writer is my Facebook page. And then I'm on Instagram at Gina Being Brave. I'm on other social media, but those are the ones that I'm most present in right now. So if you find me in one, you'll probably find me in the rest.
And you're a member of our intentional motherhood community on
Yes.
Facebook as well, which I'm grateful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
So
hope
thank you so much
people,
for having me.
oh, you're
I
so welcome.
appreciate this time.
Yeah, and I hope people check you out and check out beingbrave.faith. I know you have a lot to offer, and you do a weekly live on Facebook as well. So that's a
I do.
so yeah.
Yeah. If you click on the writing page, and then there's a join button to join the Facebook group. It's a private group, so it's a smaller group of us. There's probably about 20 of us right now in that group. So I do a Facebook Live every week about different topics about being brave, and I send out newsletters and things like that once a month, and then I do an encouragement every Friday in an email too. So there's lots of ways to connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gina. You have a blessed weekend.
Thank you. You too, Patty.
Okay, bye.